الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا وسيدنا وحبيبنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما يا رب العالمين. اللهم أرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه وأرنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. You know, the story of Ibrahim alayhi salam is absolutely fascinating. It's truly, truly amazing, not to take anything away from the other prophets. All of the stories of the prophets alayhim as-salatu was-salam, they're amazing stories, but in particular, the father of the Anbiya, Ibrahim alayhi salam, his story is absolutely fascinating. And subhanAllah, tonight, inshallah ta'ala, I'm going to try to do my best, even though it's very difficult to do justice to any part of the story of Ibrahim alayhi salam, let alone in 45 minutes or less than 45 minutes, as I just noticed. But I will try to do my best, inshallah ta'ala. But any part of the story of Ibrahim alayhi salam is absolutely amazing. And the beautiful thing about the miracle that we all have with us, the Quran, the speech of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is that it is truly, truly a miraculous book. It is more vivid than, I would say, any Hollywood blockbuster movie that is out there. I know there's a movie coming out, or it's out, I'm not sure, about the Prophet Musa, and there's other stories and movies that come out and so on and so forth. But wallahi, a person who truly understands the Quran and contemplates the Quran and delves into the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and reads and understands the richness of the Arabic language, even though it is seemingly text, it's words, I guarantee you it is more vivid and amazing than any movie or any representation of the prophets of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So tonight, inshallah ta'ala, we're going to talk about the Prophet Ibrahim. And I know the title of the lecture said the advice of the Prophet Ibrahim to his father. In actuality, it was more like the da'wah of the Prophet Ibrahim to his father. What Ibrahim alayhi salam was doing in this scenario, in this case or this glimpse of the story, is that he was calling his father to the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Just to give you a little bit of background on the father of Ibrahim alayhi salam, Azar, basically he was an idol worshipper. Not only was he an idol worshipper, he was in business with the idols as well. What was his business? He was a businessman who would actually build these idols. He would carve up these idols out of stone, and he would sell those idols, and he would make money. So if you look at, just to give you some background of the father, Ibrahim alayhi salam, he was invested into the worship of the idols in two ways. Not only when it comes to his aqeedah, his beliefs, his religious beliefs, what he has grown up on, the religion of his forefathers, so-called. Not only that, but even from his livelihood, he was invested in that. And that's very important to understand when it comes to the story of Ibrahim alayhi salam and his father, because a lot of times when we are in a situation, when we're advising someone or we're giving da'wah to them, it is very easy to just prop up the truth or what we believe to be the truth and just like shove it in their face. And not understanding that they may have certain baggage that they're coming with, they have a certain background, they have life experiences, they have things that they have been through that we need to very much take into account. And so the da'wah that we make to one person is not going to be exactly the same when it comes to someone else. We have to tailor our da'wah. We have to make sure that we take into account the person that we are calling, the mad'u as it is called, or as a person is called. The person that we're giving da'wah to, it is very important to understand that person, understand their background, understand their baggage, whatever that they're coming with. So I want to, inshallah ta'ala, even though this the story of Ibrahim alayhi salam is mentioned in quite a few places in the Quran, what we're going to do tonight, inshallah ta'ala, is that we're going to visit or hopefully revisit some of the ayat in Surah Maryam. And basically this is a glimpse of a conversation that took place between Ibrahim alayhi salam and his father Azar. And so in this conversation we see the approach that Ibrahim alayhi salam used when calling his father to Islam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَاذْكُرْ فِي الْكِتَابِ إِبْرَاهِيمِ. That recall or mention in the book the story of Ibrahim alayhi salam. إِنَّهُ كَانَ صِدِّيقًا نَبِيًّا. That he was a siddiq, he was an honest, a truthful person, and he was a nabi. Now, what is the significance of mentioning that he was a nabi? What was the significance of mentioning that he is a truthful person? Here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking to us. And Allah is telling us that here is an example for you. As we know, the prophets were examples for us. So Allah is saying, this man, he is an example for how you deal with people. And so if you're ever put in this situation where you have to give da'wah to someone who is older than you, someone who is respected in the community, maybe a parent, maybe an elder, maybe a grandparent, maybe an uncle, someone who is older than you, this is your best example. Because this man was not only a truthful man, he was a messenger, a nabi, and a prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so Allah is reminding us of the position that Ibrahim alayhi salam held. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us how the conversation began. إِذْ قَالَ لِأَبِيهِ يَا أَبَتِي. So first and foremost, Allah says, he said to his father, Ya abati. And this statement, abati or ya abati, in Arabic, this is a very endearing term. This is the statement that when you say it to your father, it is an expression of your love for your father. And so what we notice here is that immediately the way Ibrahim starts his da'wah to his father is that he uses the kindest and the best words that he can find. He uses very endearing term, almost saying, my beloved father, I have something to say to you. He says, لِمَ تَعْبُدُ مَا لَا يَسْمَعُ وَلَا يُبْصِرُ وَلَا يُغْنِي عَنْكَ شَيْئًا. He says, my dear father, my beloved father. He says, how can you worship something that does not hear, that does not see, and that cannot benefit you in any way? And so, first and foremost, we see a couple things. First, we see that the da'wah, as we said, he's giving da'wah to his father. And a lot of times, subhanAllah, I know it is hard to give da'wah to your parents. It is hard to give da'wah to your family and those who are closest to you. Sometimes, subhanAllah, you may find even public speakers and imams and scholars, and this is something that a lot of them will testify to, that it is always easier to give da'wah to those people who are not related to you. Because those people who are related to you, they don't really take you seriously. They're like, yeah, we know you. And especially if you're younger than them, and this is something I personally have experienced, subhanAllah, where there's people who are like, yeah, I saw you when you were a child. Or I've even heard somebody say, I changed your diapers when you were a baby. What are you going to tell me about Islam? Right? I saw you when you were born, and so on and so forth. But subhanAllah, this is the type of person that Ibrahim is showing. We see here that he is giving us an example how to talk to someone like this. So he said, oh my father, that endearing term. And now what he does, he starts his da'wah by appealing to the intellect of his father. So he uses an intellectual argument. He says, how can you worship something? How can you worship something that doesn't see, that doesn't hear, and that cannot benefit you in any way? And so we see here, subhanAllah, that he is referring to the background. He's referring to the background of his father, because he knows, he understands his father. And this is from the wisdom of Ibrahim alayhi salam, that he understood where his father is coming from. So he said, these idols that you worship, and that's what he's referring to here, that he's telling him, basically, you've carved these from your own hands. You are the one who built these idols, and obviously they cannot see you, they cannot hear you, they can't do anything for you. Then how can they be deserved to be worshipped? How can you worship something that cannot benefit you in any way? And subhanAllah, if you look at the way he started off this da'wah, he didn't start off with condemning his father. Even though it may seem like condemnation if you're not paying attention, it is actually, we would actually consider this more of a rhetorical question. It's almost as if he's not putting his father down. He's saying, how about you think about this? Right? Here's a question, how about, and it's almost like he wants them to think about it. And this is, subhanAllah, is very important, that when you are talking to someone who is older than you, are talking to someone who is respected in the community and so on and so forth, that you understand that the way you present the message can either be the success or the failure of the message that you are trying to get across. So it is very important that we take into account that the position that they have. And what's important here, subhanAllah, is that Ibrahim, he understands that in the end of the day, this is his father. And even though he is a mushrik, even though he worships other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is something which is obviously horrible, it's bad, but the right that he still has upon him is that he is his father. And just being his father, he deserves that respect of being his father. And so what he does is he makes sure to start his da'wah with not hurting his father's ego. A lot of times what happens is, subhanAllah, when people get frustrated in giving da'wah, especially to someone who's older than you and somebody who kind of disregards what you have to say, is that our own ego gets bruised. And sometimes we will use harsh terms, or sometimes we will get harsh with the person because for ourselves, we cannot control our ego. right? Or we may say to ourselves, like, why do I have to pander to this person's ego? Why do I have to put myself down for this person? In reality, you have to understand that the message of Islam is far greater than your own ego or your need to, subhanAllah, feel superior to this person because of your knowledge or your understanding or whatever it may be. That the message of Islam is far more important than that. And we see here, subhanAllah, this is from the wisdom of Ibrahim alayhi salam. And this is something that Ibrahim alayhi salam possessed. That he not only had the knowledge, we see his wisdom coming to light here. And this is the importance of, subhanAllah, pairing wisdom with knowledge. I remember, subhanAllah, while I was studying at the University of Medina, in my 3rd or 4th year, I remember that when we would look at the students, amongst the students, the most annoying students were always the first-year students. Why? Because they would come, and in the first year, maybe they're studying Arabic, they learn a little bit of hadith and Quran and this and that, and all of a sudden, subhanAllah, they become very, very harsh. And they feel like they know the correct opinion regarding every single issue. And I remember, subhanAllah, the older students, they'd just be like, listen, just don't talk to me. Right? Like, I just don't want to deal with you right now. Come talk to me in a couple years. Right? Why? Because, yes, they may have gained some knowledge, but they lack the wisdom. And that, subhanAllah, even in like a 6-year career or a 6-year path in the University of Medina, 2 years in the Arabic program, 4 years in the degree program, even within those, I remember, subhanAllah, you could see a person grow and evolve, and you can see them mature. Not maybe their opinions may not have changed, even though opinions change as well, but just in the way they present that information, just in the way they give da'wah to other people. And this is why, subhanAllah, you see Ibrahim, from his wisdom, he knows how to give da'wah to his father. He knows the best way. He starts off with appealing to his intellect, and he starts off with something that even Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds the people of. And even Allah uses this very same method of calling people to the truth. أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ. Do not use your aql. Do not use your intellect. And here, Ibrahim alayhi salam starts off his da'wah to his father with the issue of his intellect. He appeals to his intellect. Then he says, يَا أَبَتِي إِنِّي قَدْ جَاءَنِي مِنَ الْعِلْمِ مَا لَمْ يَأْتِكَ. He says, oh my father, once again using that endearing term, that it has come to me, or there has come to me some knowledge, مَا لَمْ يَأْتِكَ, that some knowledge that has not come to you. فَاتَّبِعْنِي, so follow me, أَهْدِكَ صِرَاطًا سَوِيًّا. He said, if you follow me, I will guide you to the straight or to the even path. And we see here now that he moves Ibrahim alayhi salam. He goes from appealing to the intellect of his father, he goes on to the issue of knowledge. And here he is telling his father that, listen, I'm not just speaking from my own, right? This is not just stuff that I'm saying. Yes, I started off with an intellectual argument, and you may think I'm just saying this stuff because it is part of my intellect. Here, now, he moves from intellect, from reasoning to revelation. He moves from reasoning to revelation. And this shows you, subhanAllah, that true insight is made up of both. And we know the ayah in the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells the Prophet sallallahu قُلْ هَذِهِ سَبِيلِي أَدْعُو إِلَى اللَّهِ عَلَى بَصِيرًا. Say, this is my path. I call to it with insight, basira. This basira has to be made up of two things. Your intellect, your understanding, and also proper knowledge and revelation. So we see here Ibrahim alayhi salam telling his father, listen, yes, I appealed to your reasoning, and I showed you why it doesn't make sense that someone would worship an idol. Doesn't make sense. Now I am telling you that also revelation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has come to me. Right? So we see here, subhanAllah, the pairing of revelation and reasoning. And this is why, subhanAllah, someone who is lacking one of either both or one of two will oftentimes do more damage than good. And wallahi, we have seen this happen. Someone who either has knowledge but doesn't have the wisdom, or they may claim to have wisdom, but they don't have the knowledge. And I'll give you an example, a real life story, something that was told to me. There was a sister who shared her story with me. And she told me that she was brought up in a Muslim household, but nobody practiced Islam in her house. And I believe her father was Muslim, but her mother was not Muslim or something like that. So she said, I never actually ever prayed in my life. I had a Muslim name, and that's about it. I never had any exposure to Islam besides the fact that I know my dad is Muslim. And she says, at a point in my life, I became concerned about my spirituality, and I started thinking about the bigger questions of life, like what happens after you die, and what is the purpose of life, and so on and so forth. And she said, someone told me, I met a Muslim, and they said, they explained Islam to me, and they said, what is a very powerful spiritual experience? Making dua to Allah, calling out to your Lord. Making dua, praying to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a powerful experience. Ask Allah to guide you. And so she said, she asked this person, she said, where can I go and do that? The person said, listen, you can pray anywhere, but a good idea is to go to the masjid and pray, because that is when the congregation, the Muslims come together, and you're in the house of Allah, you're in the masjid, and you will feel that spirituality. And so she says that I went to the masjid to feel that spirituality. And we know people like this, right? That they're looking for that spiritual experience. And so she says, I went to the masjid, and she says, there was a prayer happening, and the person had told me that make sure you cover yourself, put on a scarf before you go to the masjid. She said, I put on a scarf. She said, I didn't know how to wear a scarf, but I just tied it around my head the best I could. She said, I joined the prayer, and during the prayer, I felt someone nudging me. And I was like, what is going on? Why does somebody keep hitting me in my prayer? She says, the whole prayer, there was somebody nudging me on the side. She says, until the prayer was over, and my whole prayer, I was trying to experience this spirituality, but I couldn't because there was someone nudging me on the side. And she said, after the prayer was over, the person who was praying next to me, an auntie, right? She comes to me and she said, I was nudging you because your neck got uncovered when you were praying. And she goes, okay, so what does that mean? She doesn't know what that means. And then this auntie, she tells her, she says, listen, your prayer was not accepted by Allah. She says, why? She says, because one of the conditions of the prayer is that your awrah has to be covered. And because your awrah, your neck was showing, your awrah was uncovered, your salah is invalid. And subhanAllah, this sister says that when I heard that, I almost was in tears. I thought to myself, how can somebody tell me that God will not listen to my prayers? How can somebody tell me that God will not accept my sincere devotion to Him? And she said, Wallahi, I left the masjid that day, and that was my first experience when being in a masjid. And she says it took me years to build up the courage to come back. Alhamdulillah, she's Muslim now, she's a practicing Muslim, alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah, Allah guided her. But that was it. So what happened here? If you look at this scenario, if you look at what happened, this is a real life story. What happened is that this sister, may Allah guide her, she had some knowledge, but she lacked the proper understanding of the knowledge, and she lacked wisdom as well. So there is a lack of both here. If she had the proper knowledge, she would understand that your awrah, covering your awrah, is a condition of salah. And yes, your salah is invalid if your awrah is uncovered, if you do it on purpose. Meaning you uncover your awrah on purpose and you pray, yes, in that case your salah is invalid. Or if your awrah gets uncovered while you're praying and you realize it and you don't do anything to rectify that situation, in that case, yes, your salah may be invalid. Now this sister, subhanAllah, she was ignorant of that fact. She had no idea that even that place has to be covered. That's number one. Number two, if this sister, may Allah guide her, reward her for the goodness, her good intention. If she had the wisdom, she would maybe try to understand where this sister is coming from. We said Ibrahim alayhi salam, he understood the background of his father. He understood what baggage he is coming with when he's giving him da'wah. So if this sister understood who this sister was, she may know that, subhanAllah, prayer, as important as it may be, this sister has bigger issues. And those are issues of iman. Those are issues of la ilaha illallah. She doesn't even believe fully in God right now. So even if you were to make sure she's praying a perfect prayer, if she hasn't taken her shahada, what is that prayer worth? You can fix her prayer all day long. You can make her a faqihah in the prayer. Tayyib, you give her a halaqah on the prayer, teach her how to pray. But if she hasn't taken her shahada, what's the point? And that comes from wisdom. And so we see here, subhanAllah, Ibrahim alayhi salam, in this case, he brings them wisdom and he brings the knowledge as well. Then he says, Ya abati, La ta'bud ash-shaytan. He says, oh my father, and notice, subhanAllah, how Ibrahim, he doesn't stop from using the same endearing term. And the scholars mention, subhanAllah, that he keeps trying this, even though we don't see it told to us explicitly in these ayat, but he is now, what is happening after, from ayah to ayah to ayah, is that his father is rejecting what he is saying. So his father, he says this, he makes this argument, he gives him this da'wah, his father rejects it, then he moves on to the next thing. His father gives him this, his father rejects it, he moves on to the next thing. And now his father rejects it again, And still, after this third, fourth time of rejection, he still uses that endearing term. He says, Ya abati, my dear beloved father. He says, La ta'bud ash-shaytan. He says, do not worship ash-shaytan. Inna ash-shaytana kana lirrahmani asiyya. That most certainly the shaytan is to the most merciful disobedient. To ar-Rahman, meaning Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. طيب, what does ash-shaytan have to do with this situation right here? And you may say to yourself, subhanallah, was his father actually worshipping ash-shaytan? Was he a devil worshipper? Yes or no? Trick question. Yes and no. When you look at the direct worship, yes, he was worshiping these idols. But if you look at the bigger picture, and if you understand how shaitan works, and you understand the doors that a shaitan enters upon man through, if you understand the methods of deception of a shaitan, in reality, it was the worship of a shaitan that it goes back to. And this is why, subhanallah, we see that the worship of other than Allah is the da'wah of a shaitan. And we see, subhanAllah, the ayah in Surah Al-Baqarah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Allahu waliyyu alladhina amanu, yukhrijuhum min al-dhulumati ila an-nur. That Allah is the ally, the protector of those who believe. Allah brings them out of the darkness into the light. وَالَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا أَوْلِيَاؤُهُمُ الطَّاغُوتِ. And those who disbelieve, their allies is who? At-taghut. يُخْرِجُونَهُم مِّنَ النُّورِ إِلَى الظُّلُمَاتِ. They take them out of the light and they take them towards the darkness. طيب, the scholars of tafsir regarding this ayah, this is Surah Al-Baqarah, I believe it's 2 ayahs after Ayat Al-Kursi. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions at-taghut, that the taghut are the allies of those who disbelieve. What is their job? To take people out of the light of guidance, into the darkness of the disobedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the worship of other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The scholars of tafsir, when they make tafsir of this ayah, they say at-taghut here refers to a shaitan. And yes, it refers to the lesser tawaghit as well. And basically, a taghut is someone or anything that is worshipped besides Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And some scholars mention that they also call to their own worship and so on and so forth. So those are included. But the main taghut is a shaitan. And so Ibrahim here, what he is doing with his father is that he's showing his father the bigger picture. He's saying, listen, it's not just about your idols here. It's not just about you worshiping your idols. It's not this small matter. Look at the bigger picture. By worshiping these idols, by making dua to these idols, what you're actually doing is that you're in the obedience of a shaitan. Because inna shaitan, he is an enemy for mankind. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, that inna shaitan lakum adu. That most certainly the shaitan is an enemy for you. فَاتَّخِذُوهُ عَدُوًّا. So take him as your enemy. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَا تَتَّبِعُوا خُطُوَاتِ الشَّيْطَانِ. Do not follow the footsteps of a shaitan. إِنَّهُ لَكُمْ عَدُوٌّ مُبِينٌ. That he is for you a clear enemy. And this is the way shaitan works. That he wants you to end up in the obedience of a shaitan, but he may not start directly with his own obedience. He will start with seemingly lesser matters. And so this idol worship or worshiping of these idols, it may seem like a small deal, but in actuality it is the worship of a shaitan. And now here, Ibrahim alayhi salam, what he is doing is, as I said, he's showing his father the bigger picture. And this is another strategy that he's trying with his father. The whole time, as we said, he is keeping the same good manner of speaking to his father. And then he moves on, and we assume here that even this is rejected by the father of Ibrahim alayhi salam. And then he goes on and says, Ya bati, inni akhafu an yamassaka adhabun min ar-Rahman. He says, oh my beloved father, once again, this same statement, the same endearing term he's using again. He says, oh my father, my beloved father, I fear that there will come to you a punishment from the Rahman. Subhanallah. If you look at the wording that Ibrahim alayhi salam uses here, it is absolutely fascinating. It's amazing. He says, I fear. He doesn't say, I fear that the punishment will come from Allah. He says, I fear a punishment will come to you from Ar-Rahman, from the merciful here. And what Ibrahim alayhi salam is doing here in his da'wah, he is juxtaposing the rahm of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with the adhab of Allah, with the punishment of Allah. And this is a form of targhib and tarhib. This is a form of showing him the rahmah, the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but reminding him that Allah is merciful, but Allah is capable of his punishment as well. And he says, I fear that if you continue down this path, that not only are you going against your intellect, not only are you going against revelation, Not only are you following the footsteps of shaitan, not only will you be worshipping a shaitan, but finally, I fear that the adhab from the Rahman, the one who is Rahman, the one who can envelop you in his mercy, the one who is more merciful than you can imagine, that merciful, I fear that the punishment will come to you from that merciful. And showing him, subhanAllah, that you are the one who is in charge of your deeds. That the Rahman will give you his mercy, but Allah has given you the free will to either obey Allah or disobey Allah. To worship Allah or to worship other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And now if you want to bring the adhab from the Rahman, then that is upon you. You are the one who is making that decision. And we see here, as we said, the da'wah of Ibrahim alayhi salam has gone through stages. And this is, subhanAllah, from the hikmah, from the wisdom of Ibrahim alayhi salam, that he used that step-by-step method. He started with something which was most commonly accepted. When you appeal to someone's intellect, it doesn't matter whether they're Muslim or non-Muslim, whether they believe in God or they don't believe in God. Intellect is something which can be universally understood. Right? And so he starts with that. His first step in his da'wah is appealing to his intellect. Then he tells him, second step, he tells him that some knowledge has come to me, meaning revelation. I have revelation, meaning I'm not speaking from myself. It's not things that I've made up. It's not my own desires. I'm speaking to you from revelation. Then he warns him of a shaitan. He tells him of a shaitan. He shows him the harms of following the path that he's going down, that he will end up in the worship of a shaitan. And then finally he warns him of the punishment. Nothing else has worked. The very last step, even subhanAllah, is what's interesting here about the usloob or the manner of Ibrahim alayhi salam, is that even when he's mentioning the punishment, his wording is still beautiful. He is still kind in his wording, but he mentions the adhab of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now at this point, after all of this reasoning, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that his father replies to him. قال, he says, أَرَاغِبٌ أَنْتَ عَنْ آلِهَتِي يَا إِبْرَاهِيمِ. He says, O Ibrahim, do you have no desire for my gods? Meaning, are you desiring something other than my gods? And what his father is doing here is that this is an emotional argument. It's void of intellect. It's void of revelation. All of those things that Ibrahim had brought, he basically just put it aside. And this is, subhanAllah, an example for us because this is very common. Someone who has been brought up in a certain way, someone who has led their life in a particular way, someone who has only known one way of worship and only known one way of doing things, they will often respond to an intellectually sound argument, to an argument which is sound from the aspect of revelation, where everything makes sense. They will respond in an emotional way, right? And a very good example of this is the example of bid'ahs, for example. If you oftentimes, subhanAllah, and by the way, bid'ahs is one of the beloved tactics of a shaitan, but if you talk about bid'ahs with someone, usually the response that you get from people is, how can this be bad when I've been doing it my whole life? Right? It's an emotional argument. And they will say, you know, my parents have been doing it, and their parents have been doing it. Or, subhanAllah, there may be some goodness, the intention is good, so they will say, how will Allah punish me for my good intention? Right? Same argument here. It's an emotional argument that the father of Ibrahim gives to him. And then he says, now this is usually the second step. When the emotional, and this happens oftentimes with parents, they can't get through to the child when from an emotional, I don't want to say guilt trip, but I'm going to say guilt trip, right? If the guilt trip doesn't work, then it often moves on to fear. Moving on to fear, he says, لَإِن لَمْ تَنْتَهِ لَأَرْجُمَنَّكَ. He says, if you don't stop calling me, then I will definitely stone you. I will kill you by stoning you. Meaning, listen, you better stop. You better stop with this da'wah that you're doing, calling to the worship of Allah alone, and you keep bothering me, keep nagging me about worshiping Allah alone. You better stop. Otherwise, I will stone you. We will have you stoned. وَهْجُرْنِي مَلِيًّا. And he says, get away from me, leave me for a long period of time. And subhanAllah, the argument or the response that you get here from the father of Ibrahim, I'm sure many of you have heard this response before. When talking to someone who is stubborn in their ways and you come to them with proofs and evidences and intellect and everything, and they almost like you've said nothing. Right? Sometimes you may say that you may be giving da'wah to someone 10, 15, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour. You bring everything you've learned, subhanAllah, you bring them evidences, clear evidences, and they turn around and say, well, you just don't love me. That's why you say something like that. Right? You're like, what? Were you not listening to what I was saying? Right? This is the same thing that the father of Ibrahim alayhi salam does. But you would think that by this time Ibrahim is frustrated. And he goes, Allah will punish you and this and that. Or he gets frustrated. But look at the response of Ibrahim alayhi salam. He says, Salamun alayk. He says, may peace be upon you. Subhanallah. And this shows you that for Ibrahim alayhi salam, it wasn't about his own need to be right. It wasn't about his own ego. It was about the message of Islam. And it is very important, subhanAllah, especially for those who are in positions of da'wah and whatever, that they make their da'wah about the message and not about themselves. That is very important, that when we are giving da'wah, we're not calling to ourselves, we're calling to the message of Islam. Because the message of Islam is perfect, but we are not. There is no human being alive today who can claim that I am as perfect as the message of Islam. There was one human being like that, sallallahu alayhi wasallam. He is no longer with us, but his guidance is with us. So it goes back to the message of Islam, and it's very important. Even people who are in the position of da'wah, that they remind the people that, listen, I am not perfect, but what I'm calling to is perfect. And to differentiate between ourselves and what we are calling to. So Ibrahim alayhi salam here is very clear. It's not about him. It's about the message. He goes, Salamun alayk, sa'astaghfiru laka rabbi. He says, I will ask my Lord to forgive you. Innahu kana bi hafiyya. That most certainly he is ever gracious to me. And once again, subhanallah, he gives a very nice type of response. And he mentions the gratitude, subhanAllah, how gracious Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. He says, my Lord is hafiyya, he is gracious, right? That you still have a chance. Even though you've rejected everything I've said, I will ask Allah to forgive you. And the scholars mention what the forgiveness here means is that Allah forgives him by having his heart accept Islam. So all his previous deeds will be forgiven. So what he is doing, he's asking for guidance for his father. That may Allah guide him. This is what he's asking for his father. And he uses the best of speech, uses the kindest of speech. And he says, my Lord is gracious. So even though you have said these blasphemous things, right? Because according to Tawheed, it's blasphemous to call to the worship of these idols and so on and so forth. He doesn't take it personally. He doesn't say, listen, I've been giving you all these arguments and this whole time you've said nothing. This is how you respond to me? He goes, listen, you still have a chance. I will ask my Lord to forgive you. And then in the end he says, وَأَعْتَزِلِكُمْ وَمَا تَدْعُونَ مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ. He says, I will leave you. أَعْتَزِلُكُمْ, I will separate myself from you. وَمَا تَدْعُونَ مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ, and that which you call upon other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Meaning he's saying, listen, now at this point, since you're not going to accept this da'wah, at the very least I know that I cannot be part of it. And this shows us, subhanallah, that it is very important that when we're giving da'wah to a beloved one, that we don't confuse the person with the beliefs that they're upon. Right? It's very important. And this happens in two ways. Either, sometimes people fall in one of two extremes. Either they will let their father or their whoever it is influence them upon misguidance because they're their father. That's one extreme. And as the Prophet told us, that there's no obedience to the creation, لا طاعة لمخلوق في معصية الخالق, or في معصية الله, that there's no obedience to the creation and the disobedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Ibrahim alayhi salam didn't take that extreme here. The other extreme, subhanallah, is the opposite of that, right? Where because someone has rejected the message of Islam or Tawheed, that you treat them in a bad way. And Ibrahim found the perfect balance in between both of that. So he says, I will separate myself from you and the worship or the dua that you're doing. He says, وَأَدْعُ رَبِّي. He says, and I will call upon my Lord. عَسَىٰ أَلَّا أَكُونَ بِدُعَاءِ رَبِّي شَقِيًّا. He says, I hope and I expect that my Lord will not be unhappy with my dua. Meaning the way I'm making this dua, that I'm hoping that Allah will be pleased in my dua. And what he's still saying here is that he hopes that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will guide his father. Now we learn here, subhanAllah, a couple lessons, and I know I'm short on time. But a couple of things we learn here, very important from the story of Ibrahim alayhi salam with his father, is that we know that his father didn't accept Islam. And this shows us that in the end of the day, what we are responsible for is conveying the message. وَمَا عَلَى الرَّسُولِ إِلَّا الْبَلَاغِ. That what is the messenger is accountable for is the deliverance of the message. And we cannot change the hearts of people. And as we know, even the uncle of the Prophet ﷺ, Abu Talib, the one who supported the Prophet ﷺ in every way, he emotionally, financially, he was his support, he was his anchor in every way. Even he did not accept Islam. And the Prophet ﷺ was on his deathbed, waiting for him on his deathbed. He was pleading with him just to say La ilaha illallah. He would say to him, just say La ilaha illallah so I can have the permission to seek forgiveness for you. So I will have some excuse with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And his uncle Abu Talib did not accept Islam. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, إِنَّكَ لَا تَهْدِي مَنْ أَحْبَبْتَ وَلَكِنَّ اللَّهَ يَهْدِي مَنْ يَشَاءُ. That you cannot guide those whom you love. Meaning you cannot change the hearts of the people that you love. Rather, it is Allah who guides whomever He wills. And once you understand this principle, it'll be a lot easier for you to not be harsh with people. It'll be a lot easier for you to go gentle on people and remind yourself that in the end of the day, it's not about this. It's not about me and him or me and her. It is about the truth. And it is about our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And lastly, and I apologize for going over, but lastly, when it comes to ourselves, we don't want to put ourselves in a position that because of someone's refusal to accept our da'wah, that we actually end up losing reward. How do you lose reward? By treating the person in a bad way, by talking bad about them, or by being harsh and by being mean to them and so on and so forth. What ends up happening is that you go from a position of making da'wah to losing reward, and that is how shaitan gets you. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us the character like the character of the prophets, alayhim as-salatu was-salam. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless us with knowledge that is beneficial and to act upon that knowledge. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us the wisdom to convey that message. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Wa jazakum Allahu khaira. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.